Thank you for joining me today at A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing with Grandma. Thank you for joining me today in my studio. You might recall that we began a new study board with birds, with graphite and watercolor. Well, today we are going to begin a new study, and I'm going to simply lay in the graphite this time and not go into too much detail with the graphite, but the majority of the demonstration will be in watercolor. So we are doing a falcon head, and he, of course, has a beautiful oval head with this structured beak that must be placed correctly. And so I'm going to begin structuring the head by making sure that the curve of the neck matches with the placement of that beak and then the eye. And once I have those areas accurate, then the rest will fall into line pretty simply. And I can begin with applying some of the techniques with the pencil and then the watercolor. He has a very distinct, strong brow, and it's angled. And it reveals this very dramatic forehead that leads into this base of the beak that is pretty broad. So I'm going to need to be careful with that. I want to be sure to capture the expression on his face, the intensity, so the details of the eye and the line structure that I try to be as effective as I can in laying in with that front of the head is going to be really important. Also, I want to look for the center of the head in order to position it correctly, and there's a definite pattern to his feathers and the laying in of the way his hairs and feathers are laying consecutively. So I'm going to try to establish that motion as I work with my pencil and then later with the brush. So if you look closely, you can see a very strong oval shape in that head. And that is something I need to maintain because it is the evidence of an accurately drawn head, and it just helps to reveal the particular anatomy of this creature. The position of the beak is important. It's maybe a little large, so I might need to reduce it once I begin painting, because sometimes it's difficult to see how the value of the painting colors will change the illusion of the size of an object. So I'm going to kind of let it stay for a bit and then adjust if needed. I'm going to leave it this way and begin with my color washes. So he is a very beautiful deep brown, but there is an undertone of this tan and light reddish brown in the lightest areas of him. So I'm going to lay in a wash to stain him first. And as I'm laying in the wash, I'm going to use the edge of the brush which is a flat brush, to create some of the hair lines and structure of all of those feathers laying beautifully together in line and in rows and in patterns. So I don't want to paint up and down or side to side. I want to move in the direction of his feathers and to make sure that I vary the darks and lights according to what I'm seeing in the image. I am purposely leaving a lot of plain white areas where the highlights are going to remain, but it is not as easy as it looks to leave those untouched as I deepen the values and add more dark browns and eventually some black into those darkest colors. But I have him stained now, and now I'm going to work with a little bit of shadow areas, and I like to do my shadows with blues and violets as a stain first, and then I can adjust if needed. So in the curve of the neck, the base of the beak, and in the shadows of the eye, I want to lay in a little bit of a gray-blue. I may take in some violet later, but I may not need to. I'm going to lay in the foundation of the areas on the beak that are yellow so that I can keep them pure and untouched. They're really, there's only those two areas with the yellow, so I wanted to lay that in, and hopefully I won't interfere with that yellow from here on out. I can deepen the shadows in that brow. I'm going to develop the beak, which is gray on top, and then it has a very strong curve which leads us to a black tone. The pupil has a glimmer of light that I need to keep untouched. And then I'm going to develop a little bit of hair work with the grays and the black. This is a really good brush to be working with. It's also a flat brush, but it's a little smaller than the one that I used with the washes. I'm going in with now some dark browns and some black to kind of continue to stain the brown color on him, but still maintaining that hair-like feel. There are patterns on him. His chest and tummy get lighter as we go down. So I'm going to fade it out and let the focal point be the head and the shoulder area and the underlying area of his neck, and let it fade and curve out to that back left area. So I want to be careful not to put too much attention on the lower part of the painting. We want to keep the focal point on his eye and head, his expression, and then diminish and fade out the colors as I move toward the bottom of the painting and out toward the left. As I'm working with the hairs and the feathery marks, the top of his head is quite light, even though there are some patterns there, so I need to keep that watery and clear. I'm still using this small brush to try to define those beautiful patterns on his head and his shoulders. It's a small enough brush for detail, but also to do broader spaces as well. Okay, I want to carry down some of this pattern and the suggestion of his chest area and the wing, but I really want the focal point to remain at the top. I'm going to lay in some blue to hint in the shadowed areas, just to add a little bit more rich color. And then later I'm going to come in with a wash of a yellowish brown that will help even intensify the color more. Let's try to finish up the details in the eye. I'm using a tiny brush and I don't really like it very much, but it's helpful for these really small areas. But I think I'm going to go back to my flat, larger brush and try to finish with that one. Each layer deepens the brown where needed. It intensifies any colors that need enrichment and helps with the shadow placement, while at the same time leaving pure white areas untouched. The eye needed a little bit more brown, and I need to enrich the overall color a little bit just to make him stand out, to unify those hairs. Now I want to add that wash of lighter yellow, but first we want to establish the background. I just want to give a suggested background, and so I'm using a blue-green, and so I've just kind of laid that in just to suggest it. And then I want to lay in this beautiful reddish yellow brown, yellow ochre. I think we've got him the way we want him, and I'll show him to you in our next lesson with some completed details after he dries a little. Just a little bit more defining will help. That right edge is difficult to see. Thank you for joining me today at A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing and Painting with Grandma.